So since you have already read it, I will read each sentence, and if it's clear, we'll go on. Okay. So in the previous para, because he is starting with but all this, he has told you that the Gita is a synthesis. Okay. He has listed many synthetic systems in India. He has told you first it's the Vedas, because the Vedas are combining heaven and earth. They are combining the superconscious and the inconscient. They are not rejecting the lower. So that's the first synthesis. Then the second is the Vedantic synthesis, the Upanishads. Then he has told you also earlier, but other synthesis, the Gita is a synthesis, then also the Tantra is a synthesis.
Tantra.
Yeah. Then he has discussed the historicity of Krishna. Okay. He has told you that he appears in the Chandogya Upanishad. Then he is also there, known in other Puranas. So it was just enough to say Devaki's son, and you would know who it is. So there is a very good possibility of his being a historical character. Okay. So now, but all this they are saying is okay, though of considerable historical importance, has none whatever for our present purpose, because history is in time and space, whereas spirituality is not in time and space. It is outside time and space, that which is permanent. History is not permanent. History goes on changing. And interesting, I am making a comment now because it is a well-known, recognized fact that history is most inadequate and inaccurate also. Because who is writing the history? Human beings. And human beings will write according to their own way of looking at things. I'll give you two instances, okay? Even the famous historian, um, the one who found a great culture in India, he's an American. I forget his name now. But he says that history is nothing but somewhat of a guesswork and also a very subjective explanation. So Srebno is not giving much importance to it. It's considerable importance, yet nothing very important, because, and the best example of distortion of history is the Indian context. Okay, it's very surprising because the the whole history, the freedom movement of history, was given to by Nehru and he told certain historians to write, and he said concentrate on our freedom movement. But when they spoke about the Bengal movement and the first attempts at with violence, he refused. And afterwards, now all those details are coming out because it began long, and not only that, the whole attempt of Indian National Army, that of Subhash Chandra Bose, was all suppressed because they wanted only there. So this is a very good example of how history, and now it is slowly being rewritten. If you examine the YouTube videos, particularly there is one Sai, there is one boy called Sai. He is a Tamilian, but he is very nationalistic. He says, I am Indian coming from the south. I am not a South Indian. He says, I am not a South Indian. I am not a Bengali or a Gujarati. I am an Indian coming from Gujarat. I am an Indian coming from Bengal. I am an Indian from South Africa. So he is wonderful, that boy. Anyway, he has written also. And we are slowly discovering our true culture. All that has been written about India is by the Westerners, and they have suited their own. So history is something not at all that important. It depends on who is writing. Okay? Even I forget his name, the very famous historian, and he's also a philosopher from America. He discovered the greatness of India, and he told the British, you can't keep India under your slavery all the time. It has to be free. What a great culture. Okay. So anyway, I'll get the name, but now I'm forgetting the name. He's a very well-known historian. So even he says that, okay, that history is not at all, it's a largely a guesswork, and it's a very subjective look at things. Okay, particularly, and I told you just now, it depends on who is writing. And the best example, as I told you now, is our own Indian freedom movement. Now they are discovering all these things. Sri Lanka is hardly ever mentioned in the freedom movement, but he is one of the pioneers. Okay, it's okay. It's true that he was there only for 2 years, but all that was suppressed, purposely suppressed. Okay, so that's the thing. So now I come back to the text because Sri Aurobindo is saying very clearly, though of considerable historical importance, has none whatever for our present purpose, because our present purpose is to see the spiritual truth in the Gita, and the spiritual truth is not subject to time and space. Okay, it is eternal. It is something real, and it is something that does not change. That's why in India we have the term Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana, it is valid for all time and all places and everywhere. It doesn't change. So, next sentence. We are concerned only with the figure of the divine teacher as it is presented to us in the Gita, and with the power for which it there stands in the spiritual illumination of the human being. Note the word spiritual illumination of the human being. That's the avatar. I told you the avatar you have to define as a human being incorporating the divine consciousness, okay, and becoming conscious of it. Okay. So now I go to the next sentence. The Gita accepts the human avatarhood. This seems to be something very, very ordinary sort of sentence. Okay, the Gita accepts our human avatarhood, but 90% of humanity does not accept avatarhood. That's why it is so important what he is saying. The Gita accepts the human avatarhood. For the Lord speaks of the repeated, the constant manifestation of the divine in humanity when he, the eternal unborn, assumes by his Maya the power of the infinite consciousness to clothe itself apparently in finite forms, the conditions of becoming which we call birth. So this is, and there is a footnote, Bahuni me vyatitani janmani sambhavami yuge yuge. This is in the Gita, it is there, and this is what he is quoting. The constant manifestation. Okay. In fact, it's a very interesting question, but somebody asked Mother, do you remember your past lives or something like that? And she says, I was there always from the beginning of creation. So it's a statement that establishes the avatarhood. Okay. She is conscious of all her births in the past. Okay. So note I read that sentence, that phrase again. For the Lord speaks of the repeated, the constant manifestation of the divine in humanity. When he, the eternal unborn, because he is eternal unborn, he is always permanently stationed on top. Okay. He does not come down always, but when he comes down, he becomes the avatar. He, the eternal unborn, assumes by his Maya, his power of limiting himself, by the power of the infinite consciousness to clothe itself apparently in finite forms. So here you have the Sri using the same clothing, because in the Gita also the body, mind, life is compared to clothes which you throw out when they are old and you put on a new clothes with your rebirth. Okay. So the infinite consciousness to clothe itself apparently, mind you. Okay. Because if you have the eyes, you can see through the body, mind, life, and you can recognize the avatar. Apparently in finite forms, the condition of becoming, which we call birth, the condition of becoming, because he is being, and he, when he takes birth, he becomes the body, mind, life. Okay? That's what he's saying. Very interesting words, which you, if you put full value to these words, then you see also the process. Becoming, being and becoming. Becoming, necessarily action, okay, transience. Being, permanent on top, which we call birth. But it is not this upon which stress is laid, but on the transcendent, the cosmic, the internal divine. The transit. So here also he is repeating all the three possibilities. Transient, the divine can be outside the universe. The cosmic can be in the universe, in every aspect, in every object of the universe, he is there. And the internal, the personal aspect in lodged in every human breast. Okay, so it is on the source of all things and the master of all, and on the Godhead secret in man. This is the stress in Gita is on this. He is the teacher, the eternal teacher. He is already there in you. He is also on top and in the universe. Depends on how you experience him first. That it is on the source of all things and the master of all in the Godhead. Note the words source, capital S, master, capital M, and Godhead, capital G. Secret in man. Secret. But you can discover him, he doesn't become secret anymore. It is this internal divinity who is meant when the Gita speaks of the doer of violent asuric austerities, troubling the God within, or of the sin of those who despise the divine lodged in the human body, or of the same Godhead destroying our ignorance by the blazing lamp of knowledge. So there are many references here. In first, austerities troubling the God within, chapter 17, verse 5 and 6. Those who are reading the Gita can note that, okay, and see what he is saying. Okay. Then the next one, and the sin of those who despise the divine lodged in the human body, or of the same Godhead from inside, destroying our ignorance by the blazing lamp of knowledge. That is chapter 10, verse 11. Okay. So these are the references that Srimad is giving from there. It is then, in other words, the avatar in the body-mind life is not that important because it comes down into history. But the one that who is eternal, who is inhabiting the body-mind life and who is outside history, who is permanent, that is the stress in the Gita. That's what Srimad is saying. Okay. So, listen. It is then the eternal avatar, eternal, not the word, not the avatar who is in the physical body and who is transient. The body is transient. This God in man, the divine consciousness, always present in the human being, who manifested in a visible form, speaks to the human soul in the Gita. Okay. Who is the human soul? Arjuna. Okay. And in a visible form, Krishna. Who manifested in a visible form, Krishna, speaks to the human soul in the Gita. The human soul, he is not saying Arjuna, mind you, it's very interesting because the whole Gita is advice to the human being, any human being. So, human soul, Arjuna is the symbol of the human soul. Illumines the meaning of life and the secret of divine action and gives it the light of the divine knowledge and guidance and the assuring and fortifying word of the master of existence in the hour when it comes face to face with the painful mystery of the world. Now that's very interesting because in the hour when it comes face to face with the painful mystery of this world, normally you lead an ordinary life and you're quite satisfied with it. Okay, there is no problem. You just go on with your normal life. Take your education, you get a job, you raise a family, you earn your money, nothing happens. But when a tragedy occurs, usually it is very negative circumstances. Then you start questioning, okay, what is this? How did this happen? What is the meaning of this? So that's what that also is very, very symbolic. Normally, the spiritual life starts with an incident of that type of thing. And it can be a big shock. It depends. For each one, it will be a different shock. Not necessarily always a shock, but it can start in that. In the hour when it comes face to face with the painful mystery of the world. In Arjuna's case, the painful mystery was, my God, my duty now to kill my own relatives. How can I do that? I can't do that. That's a crisis he has to face. This is what the Indian religious consciousness seeks to make near to itself in whatever form, whether in the symbolic human image it enshrines in its temples, or in the worship of its avatars, or in the devotion of the human guru, through whom the voice of the one world teacher makes itself heard. So in India, three levels he is talking about. First of all, the images in the temples, the physical aspect. The next is the worship of the avatars. The avatar is not an image in the temple, but he is a being moving about and full of life. But finally, it becomes the voice of the one teacher, the spiritual knowledge. So, in three ways it can be started. But this is the whole intention, to put the human soul in relation with the divine. This is what the Indian religious consciousness seeks to make near to itself in whatever form. He has given you three forms. Whether in the symbolic human image, it enshrines in its temples. Okay. Human image. Even the Shiva, Vishnu, Krishna, it's all human image. Nowadays we have also images of Sri Ramakrishna, we have photographs of Mother and Sri Ram. This is a human image. Okay. Near to itself in whatever form, whether in the symbolic human image it enshrines in its temples, or in the worship of the avatars. That's the second, subtler than the images in the temple, or in the devotion to the human guru, through whom the voice of the one world teacher makes itself heard. Through these, it strives to awaken to that inner voice, unveil that form of the formless, and stand face to face that manifests divine power, love, and knowledge. So, the Indian tradition is catering to all levels of spiritual seeking. It can be the most ordinary. So, you provide churches, mosques, temples, and you put images there so that the beginning of a spiritual life is possible. It begins with a religious life, but it can graduate very clearly to a spiritual life. Okay, so that's what he's saying. So, in other words, this paragraph is stressing on the divine Krishna, not the human Krishna. In the next paragraph, he is going to talk about the human Krishna. Okay, so he's told you that that's the most important aspect, not the historical Krishna, but the divine Krishna, which is there in the importance given in the Gita. But there is also the human Krishna. So that's the next paragraph. So we can start reading this paragraph, the second one. Secondly, the typical of the human Krishna. It's nearly one page, so we can start reading. Who will read? Any one volunteer, and we start reading.
Suki can read.
Go ahead.
Yes, I will read. Secondly, there is a typical, almost a symbolic significance of the human Krishna who stands behind the great action of the Mahabharata, not as its hero, but as its secret center and hidden guide. That action is the action of a whole world of men and nations, some of whom have come as helpers of an effort and result by which they do not personally profit, and to these he is a leader, some as its opponents, and to them he also is an opponent, the baffler of their designs and their slayer, and he seems even to some of them an instigator of all evil and destroyer of their old order and familiar world, and secure conventions of virtue and good. Some are representatives of that which has to be fulfilled, and to them he is counselor, helper, friend. When the action pursues its natural course or the doer of the work have to suffer at the hands of its enemies and undergo the ordeals which prepare them for mastery, the avatar is unseen or appear only for occasional comfort and aid. But every crisis his hand is felt, yet in such a way that all imagine themselves to be the protagonists, and even Arjuna, his nearest friend and chief instrument, does not perceive that he is an instrument and has to confess at last that all the while he did not really know his divine friend. He has received counsel from his wisdom, help from his power, has loved and been loved, has been adored without understanding his divine nature. But he has been guided, like all others, through his own egoism and the counsel, help and direction, help and direction have been given in the language and received by the thoughts of the ignorance. Until the moment when all have been pushed to the terrible issue of the struggle on the field of Kurukshetra, and the avatar stands at last still, not as a fighter, but as a charioteer in the battle car, which carries the destiny of the fight. He has not revealed himself even to those whom he has chosen.
This is the human Krishna. The human Krishna is the one who is historical, okay? And he does not reveal himself easily. And he also has many enemies and all that. So he has listed all that. So we'll have a look at that. Okay? Secondly, there is the typical, almost symbolic significance of the human Krishna, who stands behind the great action of the Mahabharata, not as its hero. That's the funny part. You would say, who do you think is the hero of the Mahabharata? It's an interesting question. Who do you think is the hero, the main character?
Krishna.
Arjuna.
He is saying it is not Krishna, not as its hero, but as its secret center and hidden guide. The apparent hero in the Mahabharata is who?
Arjun.
Yes, that's what I also feel. Of course, the Pandavas are there, that's the central thing. But it is Arjuna who is the hero of the Mahabharata. Yeah, just like Ram is the hero in the Ramayana, but here it is Arjuna. Okay. And Arjuna is a typical human being with the possibility of a spiritual life. That's what Sri Aurobindo says. He is an ordinary man but he is ready for a spiritual life. That's the symbol. Okay, so human Krishna who stands behind the great action of the Mahabharata, not as its hero, but as its secret center and hidden guide. This is the truth in the physical world also. The divine is there in every damn limited form. Okay, he is very much there and he is guiding the evolution slowly and with great difficulty, because he himself has created the conditions. I will work from darkness and I will go to light, and that's the evolution, individually as well as in the cosmos. So that action is the action of a whole world of men and nations, some of whom come as helpers of an effort and result by which they do not personally profit. And to these, he is a leader, some as its opponents. So human beings, he's talking about the human beings, some come as helpers, some come as opponents to them, and he is also an opponent. Okay, the good example of that is Rama and Ravana. Okay, and here the Arjuna and his opponent, who is the chief of the Kauravas. Who is the chief of the Kauravas? The prince.
Duryodhan.
Duryodhan. That's right. So he is the opponent. Okay, so and to them he is also an opponent, and the baffler of their designs, who does not allow them victory, the opponent, and their slayer. And he seems even, and this slayer is interesting because Sri Krishna actually slays. You remember he won, he slays.
Jarasandha.
Yeah, no, Jarasandha is earlier, but in the Mahabharata, he slays the one who is insulting him all the time. And he says, enough is enough.
That is Jarasandha only, no? 1,000 insults.
No, Jarasandha is earlier. There is another character in the court. He is going on insulting Krishna, and Krishna says, enough is enough. What's his name? I forget the name. It will come anyway. So I forget the name.
He kills with his chakra, no? That one.
Yes, that's right. With the chakra, he kills him. Anyway, so that's it. Sri Aurobindo is saying that he can also be the slayer. And it seems, even to some of them, an instigator of all evil and destroyer of the old order and familiar world and secure conventions of virtue and good. You remember, Sri Krishna advises many times the advice which seems to be actually breaking the virtue and good. For instance, one example I clearly remember, he tells Bhima to attack him with his gada during the fight of Duryodhana below the belt, which is not legal. So he is breaking the ideas of virtue and good. Okay. And sometimes.
But how do you explain that?
In the physical world, okay, the explanation is very simple. Okay, virtue and sin are human standards. Are human standards. They are not the spiritual reality. Okay, because this is something that you must. This is very, very interesting, but you must understand this thoroughly. Virtue and sin. Okay, but virtue and sin are human standards. Why? Because suppose, what is virtue? To speak the truth is virtue. I give only one example. Okay? To speak the truth is virtue. But can't you use that virtue for a very, very wrong action? You can.
Yes.
With a bad intention. So that is why virtues are virtue and sins are all human standards. Okay. First is killing. Okay. Okay, murder is bad according to morality. Okay, you can never kill anybody else. That's a moral standard. But from the divine standard, if something is there to be destroyed, you have to destroy. Okay? Ravana is destroyed. Okay, Duryodhana is destroyed, and here Hitler had to be destroyed. So this idea that violence is wrong and non-violence is a moral concept. But it's not true at the higher level. That's why when you make your mind silent and go to the self, you realize that all these are standards which are valid at the moral level, at the human being, at the mental level. But they are not valid anymore when you go to the higher level. Okay.
But you are doing that in the mental or physical level, no? In a higher level, if you kill someone, it's fine. But when you are in the physical world, you have to be bound by the physical rules and regulations.
Wait. He is killing in the physical world, but where is his consciousness? Is it in the body or is it up? You be very careful. You are using the body, but the consciousness is above, not in the body. It is in the spiritual plane of consciousness. Even when you realize self,
that can be the avatar, but not Arjuna, who was not in the spiritual level.
No, avatar is extreme. But even when you are in a spiritual level, this principle applies. Okay. The principle applies. When you are free, when you have made yourself into a spiritual being, you are not identified with your body, mind, life. Virtue and sin don't matter at all.
So when Bhima hits him below the belt, he's not at the spiritual level, no? Still.
No, but we are talking of Krishna, not Bhima.
So Krishna is using Bhima as an instrument to do this?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so he's saying he seems to be even sometimes giving wrong advice. Okay, I also remind you about Socrates. Okay, he is talking about spirituality and nobody understands him. And they say that he is destroying standards. He should be finished off. Okay. So this is how the human beings don't understand that. Okay. He was poisoned. Socrates was poisoned.
Yes.
Yeah. So this happens. This is what they say. Secure conventions of virtue and good. Some are representative of that which has to be fulfilled, and to them he is counselor, helper, and friend. So this is the Arjuna. Okay, he is representative of that which has to be fulfilled. That's what I told you. That Arjuna is a man who is ordinary man, but he is now ready for a spiritual life. So this sentence that Shri is using here, representative of that which has to be fulfilled, this is typically Arjuna. because he is an ordinary man, but he is willing, ready to be spiritualized. So all these different cases Sridhar is giving, and to them he is a counselor, helper and friend. Where the action pursues its natural course, or the doers of the work have to suffer at the hands of its enemies and undergo the ordeals which prepare them for mastery, the avatar is unseen and appears only for occasional comfort and aid. But at every crisis, his hand is felt, yet in such a way that all imagine themselves to be the protagonists, and even Arjuna, his nearest friend and chief instrument, does not perceive that he is an instrument and has to confess at last that all the while he did not really know the divine friend. Srendra is referring to the chapter 11, verse 31, where he tells him that I used to think of you as a, when he shows his divine aspect, okay, the Vishwarupa. Then he says that I used to think of you as a friend, and I am very sorry because I may have spoken some words which were not okay when we are sitting or when we are having dinner. Okay, these are the words in the Gita. Okay, and in a council or when we are having playfully, I may have said something. So please excuse me. Okay, I did not know that you are the divine. So the divine is very often not. Take even Sri Aurobindo, okay? His poetry was criticized and he was, there are so many people who tell, oh, Sri Aurobindo is using violence, not good. So they don't understand. Human beings don't understand the avatar very easily. That's what he's pointing out. Okay? So that's the human aspect of the divine, of the avatar. The human aspect, very few realize. Okay? So that's what he's saying. In fact, Arjuna is thinking that he is the main protagonist. The word protagonist means what? The leading character of any play or story or anything, or a champion. Okay, so Arjuna is thinking himself to be the main, but actually he is not. Then there is the other thing also where he is saying, where the action pursues its natural course, or the doers of the work have to suffer at the hands of its enemies and undergo the ordeals which prepare them for mastery, the avatar is unseen or appears only for occasional comfort. Very good example of this is Christ. Nobody realized him as the avatar, and they actually went to the extent of crucifying him. Okay. The doers of the work have to suffer at the hands of its enemies and undergo the ordeals which prepare them for mastery. The avatar is unseen. Christ was not seen as an avatar at all. Okay? Not all, but some. Okay? There were some who saw him, of course, as not avatar, but an extraordinary
Messiah.
Yeah, Messiah. That's right. Okay. So we can go to the next one then. So he has discussed the divine Krishna and the human Krishna. So this is the phenomenon of the avatar. There is it, but the human avatar and the human being is not that important. But the teachings that he has given and the divine who helps you in every way, that's the real significance of the avatar. We go to the next para. Okay. We got 2 more paras to finish. Then he is dealing with Sri Krishna. Next chapter will be Arjuna, the human disciple. Okay? So, next you will read, any one of you, maybe Pallu.
Okay.
Thus the figure of Krishna.
Thus, the figure of Krishna becomes, as it were, the symbol of the divine dealings with humanity. Through our egoism and ignorance, we are moved, thinking that we are the doers of the work, wanting of ourselves as the real causes of the result. And that which moves us, we see only occasionally as some vague or even some human and earthly fountain of knowledge, aspiration, force, some principle or light or power, which we acknowledge and adore without knowing what it is, until the occasion arises that forces us to stand arrested before the veil. And the action in which this divine figure moves is the whole wide action of man in life, not merely the inner life, but all this obscure course of the world, which we can judge only by the twilight of the human reason, as it opens up dimly before our uncertain advance, the little span in front. This is the distinguishing feature of the Gita, that it is the culmination of such an action which gives rise to its teaching and assigns that prominence and bold relief to the gospel of works, which it enunciates with an emphasis and force we do not find in other Indian scriptures. Not only in the Gita, but in other passages of the Mahabharata, we meet with Krishna declaring emphatically the necessity of action. But it is here that he reveals its secret and the divinity behind our works.
That last bit is very interesting. The Karma Yoga aspect is there very much in the Gita. Whereas in the other yogas, particularly in the Upanishads and all that, mostly it is not karma. Karma is used only as a preliminary to get away from karma. Karma in the physical world is not at all important. It is full of imperfection and perversions. So why do that? So all the stress of the Advaita philosophy and all the other philosophy, the Bhakti movement also, Jnana movement, all, they don't give importance to karma. In the Gita only, there is a stress on the Karma Yoga. And Sri Aurobindo also wants Karma Yoga because he is not running away from the world. And if you are not running away from the world, you have to work in the world. So rather than reject karma, transform karma into a divine activity. That's the whole point. So we go back to the beginning of the para. Thus, the figure of Krishna becomes, as it were, the symbol of the divine dealings with humanity. The avatar comes down and he deals with the normal humanity. Okay? He is a symbol of the divine dealings with humanity. Note the divine is always dealing with humanity, but sometimes he brings an avatar down to the physical world, and so he is the symbol of the ever-present divine dealing with the humanity. Why? Because he is present in the cosmos, he is also present in each individual. So that is always there. That's why I'm saying symbol. Okay. Sri Krishna becomes a symbol of the ever-present and eternal divine working in humanity. You don't need an avatar for that. Even if an avatar is not there, the divine is working in the physical world. Sri Krishna is only a symbol of that. The very concrete example. Through our egoism and ignorance, we are moved, ordinary human beings, thinking that we are the doers of the work. This is one of the biggest aspects of Karma Yoga. When you go to the self, you realize that you are doing nothing. It is the universal nature, Prakriti, which is doing everything. Okay? The biggest discovery of the Karma Yoga is this. I am not the doer. I was only an instrument. I am not the doer at all. Nature is doing everything. Okay, so thinking that we are the doers of the work, wanting of ourselves as the real causes of the result. Wanting, boasting. Even if you don't boast, you do think of yourself as the real action. You are the one who is acting, nobody else. Okay? Boasting of ourselves as the real cause of the result. That which moves us, we see only occasionally as some vague or even some human and earthly fountain of knowledge, aspiration, force, some principle or light or power which we acknowledge and adore without knowing what it is, until the occasion arises that forces us to stand arrested before the veil. Which is the veil? The human avatar is the veil. Behind the human avatar, there is the divine avatar. So that forces us to recognize that, okay, I'm being helped all the time by the divine, not me doing this. And the action in which this divine figure moves is the whole wide action of man in life. Not merely the inner life, but all this obscure course of the world, which we can judge only by the twilight of the human reason. Okay, twilight. Our human reason, which is the best part of us, is only a half light. Okay? As it opens up dimly before our uncertain advance, the little span in front. The little span in front, our body, mind, life, and at a universal level, matter, life, and mind. That's his little span in front. But there is an evolution. Huh? So that evolution is there, which is slowly coming, but we don't see that. He is there constantly guiding. Evolution is possible only because the divine is there everywhere. This is the distinguishing feature of the Gita, that it is the culmination of such an action which gives rise to its teaching and assigns that prominence and bold relief to the gospel of works, Karma Yoga, gospel of works, which it enunciates with an emphasis and force we do not find in other Indian scriptures. Okay. Karma Yoga is something absolutely originating only in the Gita. Not only in the Gita, but in other passages of the Mahabharata, we meet with Krishna declaring emphatically the necessity of action. But there's one, in the Isha Upanishad also, there's a phrase, na karma lipyate nare. So there also there is a very clear indication, karma can be done and does not stick to human beings. You can get rid of the effects of karma even when you are in the body, mind, life. So there is some reference to it, but the maximum practice of Karma Yoga is brought out only in the Gita. Okay. So Krishna declaring emphatically the necessity of action. Okay. So you have to. When is it necessary for action? When you want to change your mode of living, even in the physical world. The Jnana Yoga will not agree with this. The Bhakti Yoga also need not agree with this. They may agree, but they may not agree. I don't need karma. I need only concentration in the mind. I don't need karma. I need only concentration in the heart, and that's enough for me. But if you are doing Karma Yoga, even your body, life, your way of behaving will change. You will get the. There are three muktis, no? Muktis are, what are they? Even then, forgetting now. One is the Sadharmi Mukti, okay? Then Samipya Mukti. So these are all the different muktis, but Sadharmi Mukti comes from the Karma Yoga. Okay? So that brings. So action, necessity of action in the physical world is there stressed in the Gita. So, but some people don't. Some people say, oh, Gita is only for man. But Sridhar says it's for all. In fact, it's so now in many schools, the Institute of Management, okay, IIMs, okay, they are all the Gita. How to behave in the physical world, how to deal with difficult solutions in even the business world. If you are a leader and you are a leader in a company, how do you deal with your human beings? How do you deal with the physical world? So that the Gita will tell you how to count, quiet, treat everything, and give proper value to everything. Gita is being taught. Okay, we got one. So we'll finish that last one next time, and then we'll go. So Sridhar has discussed the thought. Then he discusses the human disciple. Then he will discuss the second, which is Kurukshetra. After discussing the overall. That is the main step in Gita. We will tell you, we will go on to Kurukshetra. Kurukshetra is the circumstances in life which forces you to start a spiritual life. Okay?
Yes, Rangadhar.
So, and symbolic communication. Do that and then go on to the next step.
Merci, Rangadhar.
Okay.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, everybody.
Have a nice day, Rangadhar.
Yeah, this is.
Thank you, Angada.
Okay, au revoir everybody. Au revoir. 16.